session with British Council. So as some of our teachers know, we had an introductory session 2 days ago with the British Council. So today our focus is for middle, high school and higher secondary school. And the topic is getting your students communicating. So the presenters from British Council are Rebecca Ronson, Senior Academic Manager, British Council, UK, Mr. Danish Abdullah, Academic Manager, British Council, South India, and also we are joined today with Ms. Janaka Pushpanathan, who is Director in British Council looking after South Indian affairs. So I welcome all and I thank on behalf of Directorate of School Education, Government of Puducherry for helping us to communicate to our teachers. It will be interesting to know about language. So language, when we talk about language, in particular mother tongue, so we first start speaking and we learn a lot from the context. Then only we go for written communication. But unfortunately, what we are doing is with English, we start with alphabets and end up in spoken English, spoken language. So that creates a lot of problem. The stress is on spoken language. So once a person is comfortable with spoken language, it will be easy for him to assimilate written language also. So many people may be very fluent in spoken language, but they may not be in written language. They might not have been exposed. So the key here is making students to communicate. That's very important to learn any language. So, a brief introduction about our speakers today. Ms. Rebecca Ronson, she is a BA Honors. She is a Senior Academic Manager for South India. She joined British Council in 2011, and she was involved in training and related activities in various countries, be it the eastern countries or the western countries. She has worked actively in Cambodia, Costa Rica, Sudan, Senegal, and till recently in Sri Lanka also. So Mr. Danish Abdullah is a BCom BA Honors. He has also joined British Council in 2013 and is the academic manager for schools uh, relating to English and skills for South India. He has got vast experience in conducting large-scale teacher development projects and is associated with those kind of projects in 11 states in India. So his interests lie in training, material development for the professional development of teachers. So I welcome the officials from the British Council, and also I request our teachers to benefit from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudraji, and may I now say a few words?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Thank you very much. I think first of all, vanakkam, good morning, and I think a very early good morning to Becky, who's joining us from the UK. I mean, thank you so much, and Danish and I are from Chennai. Anu, who's been leading on this program, is from Bangalore. So I think first of all, it's an interesting confluence of sorts where we've been able to come together from various parts of the world, I must say, to do this webinar. So we're very grateful to the government of Pondicherry for having partnered with the British Council to make this webinar accessible, I believe yesterday, to 3,241 teachers who we might have not reached if we were working face-to-face actually in such a short period of time. And today, again, we have a large number of teachers from grade 6 to grade 12 joining us to explore ways of teaching our students how to communicate. I just want to say a few words about the British Council and our work that we do across India and specifically in South India, so that you get a feel of what we do, and we hope that we'll be able to collaborate more deeply in the future. We were created in 1934, and we work very closely with partners both in India and the UK and around the world, and we try to understand and stay relevant to all your changing needs. So this webinar is in fact a response to one of your needs, and we're very happy and delighted that we are able to deliver this in such quick time. And over the years, we've been building, over the last 70 years in India, we've been building very strong international connections for the whole of India and the UK. We are able to deliver very flexible and personalized offers to more and more people through not just English language, but also through our work in education, our work in arts and culture, which is the backbone of what the British Council does. We work in these three broad areas, and English and education being very, very important to us and to India as well. We've been able to create these very deep and inclusive relationships. And an example of that is our work in South India, where we have memorandums of understanding with all the states. And we're delighted with this engagement with Pondicherry and Puducherry. And I hope that this will continue into something long and meaningful and mutually beneficial to the both of us. And I think to talk about what we're doing now, it's amazing how we've been able to change gears and shift gears very fast in terms of responding to your needs, and you being able to, I think, fantastic what the government of Pondicherry is doing in order to make all of this content accessible through technology and to all of its teachers. And yesterday, I believe 2 days ago, we did a session on tips to improve spoken English. And I'm already hearing that many of you are sort of downloading the English Score app, looking at our resources. So I do hope and believe that you will take time to dip into the vast realm of resources that the British Council has, including our Teach for Success website. And I'm sure Anu and Becky and Danish would have shared with you the sort of range of materials that the British Council has. So I just want to say thank you again, and to say that we want to be able to work more deeply and meaningfully with you all. And I do believe and hope that you will find this webinar, like you did the previous one, very useful. And I want to say, wish you all a wonderful morning, and look forward to hearing back from you about how you felt about these two webinars. And I believe there's going to be a survey done by Rudraji and his team in order to let us know how it went, what worked, what didn't, what are the specific needs that you have, and hopefully we'll be able to come back together again, both online and offline, to be able to work with you closely and meaningfully. So with that, I want to say thank you again and wish you a great morning of learning and sharing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janika. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Okay. Can I just check that my screen is visible?
Yes, it's loading. Okay. Yes, ma'am, it is visible.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So thank you, everyone, especially the Pondicherry Directorate for inviting us to give the second webinar. Danesh and I really enjoyed doing the first one, and we hope that this second one can be equally helpful to everyone watching. So today's session is about getting your students communicating. That's perhaps one of the biggest challenges. We know our students sometimes can be a bit hesitant to speak. So why is that, and how can we help them get beyond that? So today we're going to be exploring this topic together. Okay. So there are 3 parts we're going to be thinking about today. The first thing is, how do we create the right environment in our classrooms, in our learning environments, whether that's remotely or in the classroom itself? How do we make students feel comfortable to talk in English? What kinds of activities and projects are most appropriate, and how can we make sure that they encourage speaking and communication? What techniques can we use to really get the students working together? And the third part we'll be looking at is how we can give feedback to students in a positive way, which encourages them and continues to motivate them to communicate, rather than shutting them down and making them fearful. So jumping right in, we'll start with how do we go about creating the right environment? Okay. So the first thing is thinking about how to make our students feel comfortable. Okay. So Danish, let's start with building rapport. do you think it's worth spending time building rapport when you've got to, we know teachers have a very busy schedule, they've got a lot of content to cover, and they've got a detailed syllabus. Why is it worth spending time building rapport?
Thank you, Becky, and good morning, everyone. An interesting question to start a session with. And I think most of the teachers can relate to it. So when we really think about our classes, the first thing we are really need to think about is the amount of syllabus we need to cover. And that definitely deserves a lot of our time. But I think spending a bit of time on building rapport can definitely make all the journey that we are going to take along with the learners, the journey of learning through the academic year or the session. It can really make it more focused, a lot more enjoyable, and a lot more built on the foundation of trust, a mutual trust between you and your students. So personally, I think it's definitely worth spending time building rapport with our learners. And I think it's not a one-off event. It's not something you do on day one or the first week of the session. I think it's something you do over the year. What do you think, Becky?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those essential foundational things that we do as teachers. And I see it not as time wasted. It's without doing this kind of thing, without building rapport, we can't actually cover the detail, we can't actually cover the curriculum in the detail that we'd like, because we don't have that trust and relationship with our students, I think. And as you say, it's really key. And it's not, like you say, it's not on day one. It's something we do every day, every time we meet our students.
Okay.
So I'd like to,
I think
go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, so I think it's not time wasted, but invested that we spend on building rapport.
Exactly, yeah. So while we're doing this presentation, Danish and I will be talking to each other, but I do want everyone at home to be thinking about these questions and thinking to themselves what their own answers are. Why do you think it's important to build rapport? What strategies do you have when you start teaching a new group? Are there particular activities you do? Are there particular things that you say or do in your classroom? How do you go about doing this? We're going to be covering lots of ideas here, but just for now, think about what things you might do. Okay, so Danish, creating a language-rich environment.
So first of all, we need to think about what's language-rich environment. Is it using a lot of English and only English all the time? Or is it also including your home language as your mother tongue to support learning of English? So I think first of all, we need to set this context clear that it's not using English all the time. It's using English and home languages appropriately to support the learning, specifically learning of English language. Why is this important? First of all, I think, when students start to attend classes where English is being taught and it's new to them. So, you have this two-dimensional zone that you're in. One is English dimension and the other one is non-English. So I think when you create this environment which supports your English learning, you know that you are in a particular zone where you're supported, where you're encouraged, and where you are expected to experiment with the language, which in turn results in students feeling safe in using English. So here we are essentially talking about learners who have varied backgrounds. Some of them might have never had any experience of learning English. Some of them might have had very experiences and not all of them positive. So it's very important to make them feel safe, especially at the starting of a session. So they're encouraged to experiment with the language. Any thoughts you would like to add, Becky?
I think that's really important. And I liked what you said about making sure it's a language-rich environment. That doesn't just mean English, it means appropriate use of the home language as well in the classroom. How would you go about doing that in your classroom, Danish?
So first of all, I think depending, of course, on the level of language proficiency of my students, I think I would first of all like to give them some classroom language. So there are times when we are not able to function fluently in a language, but if we are provided with some language chunks, especially for tasks and actions that happen regularly in a classroom, and we start to encourage our students to use English for those specific actions. For example, when you check homework, has everybody brought their homework? They say, yes, sir, I have. No, I have not. And little tasks like borrowing a pen from your neighbor. Can I use your pen, please? Can I go out? Can I drink water? So, using a little stock of such classroom English and displaying it around the walls can be really a very useful idea. Which leads us to the next point of classroom displays. What are classroom displays, Becky?
Well, I think you can see in the picture a particularly good example, a particularly colourful example of classroom displays. I think, creating a language-rich and positive environment for students to learn in includes incorporating their work visibly on the walls or around the room. To encourage them to create work that can be put on the walls and expect a high standard from them. Say, we're going to be putting this on the walls in the classroom or other areas in the school. We want this to look good, so that they are encouraged to work harder to make a good piece of work. And again, that's a communicative activity that they can do together, create posters or pictures or information boards for the classroom displays. So they can do that together in a communicative way, and then it's on the wall and it's a really positive reinforcement of their learning. And they can, they're reminded that they're in an English zone, and they can use that it makes it more comfortable for them, I think.
Yeah, Becky, I think that's really important to highlight here. Classroom displays don't have to be bought from the market, because a lot of times we worry about, not having enough funds, for example, or not having enough, charts, etc. to display. It's very important that we can encourage our students to produce those. And I think they should essentially be produced by your students. So you can use recycled paper, you can use markers, you can use really daily use, objects to create them. It's not a huge investment.
For sure. Yes, so I would say that student-made displays are probably much superior to anything you could buy in a market, because if you buy something which is ready produced, how often do the students actually look at it? They're going to be much more interested in their own work and the work of their friends.
Exactly. So there's this personal connect to what they see. Not thinking about the present time when we don't really have access to physical classrooms. Can you think of some ways where we can still use classroom displays in a virtual setup?
Yeah, I mean, if you are having a virtual setup in some form with your students, can you create, for example, a Google document or other shared document which they can create and put in a folder together, which everyone has access to? PowerPoint presentations, simple documents and tools that increase their digital literacy, but also, get them to think creatively about how to use language and design together.
That's a very good idea. And I think we can also use it when we set home tasks, when we give them homework and we ask them to produce some artifact. We can ask them to take photographs and post it on a WhatsApp group, for example, or Facebook group, whatever groups you have access to. You can encourage them to share it there.
That's a great idea. Okay, so we've talked about home languages and how we can use those in the classroom as well. Did you want to add anything more on that?
So yeah, I think we've already spoken about it, how it is important to make students feel positive about the home languages. I think it does not only support the language learning, but it also, promotes equity, diversity, and inclusion in a classroom, which I think definitely results in a positive atmosphere in the classroom. So nobody feels not welcome, nobody feels not accepted. So I think it has this dual advantage to it.
So I think another thing we would suggest is stepping back. Sometimes as teachers, we want to be in front of the classroom, we want to be taking the lead, directing the students. But I think it's often very useful and very important to step back and give that leadership role to the students themselves, get them to step up and think about what they want to do and how they want to do it. Give them an objective to achieve so that they can use their own creativity and collaborate with their classmates to come up with a unique way of achieving that objective.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important. Sorry, yeah, please go on back.
Oh, no, you carry on.
I was about to add, I think it's really important to also highlight how this little step of asking them to take the lead results in a lot of confidence in them. Even if they have limited language abilities, they will still be willing to use it. So yeah, we can move to the next point.
I think it's about building confidence. If students aren't confident to speak, they won't speak. So building confidence, giving them leadership roles, giving them opportunities, and they will be more motivated even when they're making mistakes. And it's always about creating opportunities at every point. Like you say, little moments like, can you pass me the pen? What page are we on? Things like that, create those opportunities and get students speaking. Okay, so we're going to think about building rapport and how we actually go about doing that. So we're going to watch a video now. It's about a 4-minute video, and it's got a lot of good advice from a British Council trainer called John and teachers in Thailand. In the video, John is going to talk about three aspects to building rapport: empathy, authenticity, and respect. As we watch the video, I want you to choose one of these areas, and I want you to make notes on the pieces of advice John gives. Okay, so if you choose authenticity, what tips does he give? And do you do those things in your classroom, or are they things you would like to start doing? So just give me.
By the time Becky plays the video, you might want to decide which one area you want to focus on and maybe take a quick note of it on your notebooks.
Yeah, if you've got pen and paper, that would be really good. So, let's have a...
To empathise with the students, we have to make the situation as authentic as possible, and we have to really respect the students' ability to speak. In fact, we need empathy, authenticity, and respect. We need a good ear.
Good morning, class.
Supot establishes a friendly learning environment early in the year.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you today? To motivate the student to talk, at the beginning of the semester, we found that it's a bit difficult because the student and the teacher are still not being friendly. So we have to try to be friendly with them and make them feel comfortable in the classroom.
Empathizing with the students is important to develop a rapport, a trust. The students must trust you. You must trust the students, and you have better chance of successful fluency practice.
Focus on the content words only, but you have to say the full sentence. Okay. Ready, Jay?
Montakan is a secondary school teacher and wants to encourage her students to speak more.
They're still too shy to speak sometimes, and it seems like the accuracy is more important for them, not the fluency. You have to present to me your quotes, your saying, one by one in front of the class.
You need to reassure your students that making mistakes is okay. Quite often they're doing something which is personally quite challenging. So praise them for their efforts, encourage them. If a smile will help, smile.
All of you. What are these? These are calculators. Look at me, calculators.
Eye contact is extremely important. The first thing you do when you begin to communicate with anybody is you look at them. So in the classroom, remember, establish good eye contact with your class. Ask them to look at you. Stand where they can all see you. Place your vision about halfway down the class, and by doing this, you can reach everybody.
It's expensive. It's expensive. Oh. Her birthday.
She looks old.
It's extremely important for the teacher to be genuine with the students. The student gives a good answer and the teacher says, good, fantastic, mean it. Don't do two things at the same time. Don't say yes, yes, very good, while you're doing something else, because it's obvious that you're not listening and this is lacking authenticity.
Very good one. Okay. A good habit.
Respect your students. Allow them to express themselves. Think about whether they could actually contribute more to maybe hand out things or move so they feel more involved in this.
I ask you to bring some clothes with you. Can you put it on here? Can you put it on here?
The more you involve your students, the more motivated they'll be, and this will have a positive effect on their speaking and their fluency.
Today I'm wearing a blue shirt, black jeans, and a white sock. Thank you.
Okay. We just try to encourage them, to motivate them to speak and make them interested in participate in talking. Thank you all these your friends. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I hope you found the video useful. We were going to be sending you a version of this presentation so that you'll be able to click on the logo to get the full length video. But I hope you were listening and listening out for tips and pieces of advice, and also things that you already do and perhaps things that you might like to start doing. So let's have a look at the three areas. So there was a lot of advice in the video. I picked out 3 things for each area. So give yourself a point if you got any of these. So in terms of empathy, they were saying it was very important to build empathy and trust. Okay, building trust with your students, you can do that in lots of different ways. Let them know that it's okay to make mistakes. It's a normal part of language learning. And as long as they're communicating, mistakes are perfectly fine and perfectly natural. And praise them for what they're doing. Praise them for the language they're using, for the efforts they're making, for the behaviors they're using. And that's really important to encourage them and to motivate them. In terms of authenticity, they talked about using eye contact, making sure you engage with your learners. You're not talking to a wall or the computer or anything else in the room, but you're talking to the learners. When you're giving praise, it's really important, so important to be genuine and to be real. Don't just say, oh, good, well done. Okay. Why was it good? Why have they done well? What could they improve? And be specific. So try not to use generic praise. Try and be specific in what they've actually done and why that is good. And when you are talking to students, give them your full attention. No one likes to feel like they're being ignored. So do talk to them, use that eye contact, and don't be fiddling with the register or other classroom documentation or something else. They mentioned respect and how important it is to build respect between you and your students. Giving students opportunities to express themselves, to express their personality. Give them those opportunities and find ways that they can contribute in class. So some of the ideas in the video included giving them responsibility for handing out papers and books. And there might be other ways in your classroom to do things, but include them and create, an environment where we're all in this together and you can build your language together and experiment with that language. Okay. So we saw some activities in the classroom which were very communicative in the video. We've got a couple of activities here, which you may be familiar with or you may not. There are a couple of good first lesson activities when you're starting to get to know your students, and perhaps your students are getting to know each other as well. So Danish, Star of My Life, can you explain this one?
Sorry, I did not realize my mic was muted. Thank you, Google. It reminded me. Okay, thank you, Becky. As I was saying, this particular activity here is Star of My Life, and I think activities that we'll look at, they're very useful for first lesson, but they're not limited to first lesson. Because at times what happens is we start to assume, I know my learners and they know each other. And later on we realize how wrong we were. So it's always a good idea to spread these activities over and use them occasionally, as time arises and you realize, okay, I can maybe take it one step further. So here, Star of My Life is a very simple to conduct activity. What you do is you draw a star on the board and ask your students to copy it on their notebooks. So there are 5 ends to the star. At each of those ends, write one piece of information about yourself. No long sentences, simple one single words or digits are absolutely okay. Here we have put only 3 because we wanted to save time on the demo. Now they work in pairs or in groups and take turns to guess what that particular piece of information, what that word tells you about the person, about the writer. So this Star of My Life is about me, is about Danesh. So Becky, you're my partner. Let's work on this together. Can you take a turn to guess what those words might represent about me? You can start with the easiest that you think.
Well, I suppose the easiest would be 2009. I don't know what it refers to specifically, but I presume something important happened in that year. Did you gain a particular qualification, or did you start a new job?
Yes, the second one is the right one. It was the starting of a new job. Can you guess what job it was?
Did you start as a teacher or a teacher trainer?
That's right. I started teaching in 2009.
Okay, so there you go. Okay, I'm not too sure about salt. I'm not too sure what that could mean at all. Do you like salt? Is it the name of a band?
No.
Can you give me a clue?
It's about something I like.
Do you like salt on your food?
But it's not about that. Okay, I'll give you another clue. It's about where I live.
Okay, do you live near a salt pan?
I live by the sea.
Oh, by sea.
And I love the sea.
Do you like going swimming in the sea?
Yeah, walking, swimming, spending time.
Okay, great. And what is the smoke one?
Take a guess.
Did you used to smoke?
No, I did not. It's about one of my hobbies.
Do you like making fires?
I love cooking.
Oh, well, I hope your cooking is generally smokeless.
Not always.
Not always. That's very true of my cooking.
Okay, great.
Okay, I think this is a really kind of good activity because you can see that, it really generates conversation. It creates, there's a real information gap. I don't know what these answers are, and I'm trying to find the answers. And so students try and use all their own knowledge about the other person or their teacher, and they're building up a picture, and they're bringing in new ideas which might seem crazy, but they will generate laughter and good feeling, and they'll get to know their partner or their teacher a bit better. So I think that's a really nice activity.
And very important to remember here, sorry, before we move, Becky, is that it does not need a lot of language input. You demonstrate it with them. You can restrict it to only yes, no questions. Is this your date of birth? Is this your hobby? Is this where you live? And then you answer in yes, no. Yeah. But depending on level of language proficiency, you can allow them more freedom. So it's very easily adaptable across various levels. Let's move on to the next one, Becky.
Okay. So the next one is two truths and a lie. I expect a lot of people might be familiar with this, where the teacher demonstrates with 3 sentences, 2 are true, 1 is not true, and the students ask questions to figure out which ones are true and which ones are not. So I don't think we'll have time to demonstrate it today, but it's a really good conversation generating activity. And the thing that these 2 activities have in common is that there is an information gap. Someone knows something and someone else doesn't. And that is a really good setup to create communication. One person wants to find out something about the other person. And that want is important. It can't just be one person has information that the other person doesn't want. They must want to find out. And that's why these 2 activities, which focus on the individual and about that person, are good, because we always want to know more about the people we are around every day. We're naturally curious. So activities which build on information gaps and encourage us to find out more are really great. Okay, so we're going to focus now on how we can deliver engaging lessons. We understand why it's important to build rapport and a language-rich environment. How do we go about delivering this in the classroom? So now, when you ask your students to speak, do you get instant communication, or do you get smiles and nods and looking elsewhere?
Sometimes all we get is a deadly silence.
Sorry?
Sometimes all we get is a deadly silence.
Yeah, and I think we might be all familiar with that situation. Why aren't they speaking? I think when we have that situation, the question we've got to ask is, did we give our students the time to prepare to speak? Okay. It's a difficult task, speaking and communicating in another language. Have we given them the time to do that? So, how can we help our students feel comfortable when they are speaking? I wonder if anyone at home has heard of scaffolding. Okay, this is a really important term, which this is a definition we tend to use, where we kind of break what we're teaching the students into smaller units or chunks, and we give them support at each stage. Giving them that support allows them to make progress more capably and more confidently as they go to the next cognitive and linguistic level. So we're going to look at a few techniques to do scaffolding. So while we're going through these, think about, are these things you already do, or are these things that you might start doing? Okay. So let's talk through these ones. Danish telling learners the aim of the activity. Why is that a useful technique?
I think it's really important to tell our learners what the aim of the activity is, to really get them engaged with it. Sometimes, as a teacher, I know what I want to achieve with this activity, but students don't. And they're left wondering, okay, we were talking about this, now we are going into this activity, but why? I don't know. So you are making them get into something while they're still stuck at the previous step. So when you tell them this is the activity we're going to do and this is how it will help us. So bringing this sort of clarity and helping them become mentally prepared for the activity.
And I think it also comes back to respecting the students, respecting them as individuals who are in charge of their own learning. You say, we're going to do this because this will help you to speak with the correct vocabulary on this topic, or whatever it might be. Telling them why they're doing it respects them as learners. though grading instructions and teacher talk, this is something that perhaps we do naturally, and it's something, maybe you're doing this already and you don't realize that this is a useful supporting technique to help students get from point A to point B, grading your language to a level that they're comfortable with. What do we mean by listing ideas and previous knowledge from learners?
So I think it also sort of relates to showing respect to them. Instead of starting with what they don't know, start with what they already know about the topic. So we can start by asking questions about what we are going to do, ask them what they already know about it. So this way we're also gaining their engagement. We're also making, we are activating their brains. So it helps us in both the ways, really, I think.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, exactly. And this is really kind of taking them from one level, level to the next, kind of like holding their hand to, as they start walking, to running, to beating Usain Bolt. That was a very bad example. But yeah, so start with what they know, and then you can take them to aspects of the language that they might not be familiar with. And providing a model, I think, is again something we probably always try and do, and it's so important, and saying, this is one way of doing it. It's not the only way, but using that model to take out useful language that can be used by the students, something to aspire to. This is what we're aiming for, and take out the good points from that model, and it will give them a framework to communicate more confidently. When we talk about sentence stems, do you want to explain about sentence stems, Danish?
Yeah, sure. I think we can refer to Star of My Life activity. So when we're talking about how we can set it up, so we said that we can give them examples of questions they can ask. Is this your da da da? Is this your da da da? So when you give them those kind of incomplete sentences that they only need to complete their stems. So this way we are helping them approach the activity more confidently. So for example, if I draw a star and ask them, okay, you have to make questions about it. And the students are, questions about the star. So I think those stems are really, really helpful to get them started more confidently.
Exactly. And it's one of those things which, when you do it, it's almost it's a good differentiation tool, because you're giving everyone the basics. Okay, so start with this. Here are how to form some basic questions, or whatever the sentence stems are. And then those students who feel more comfortable or who have more language or feel more experimental can then go beyond that. But it gives everyone a basic starting point from which they can at least say something. And then when they get more confident, can then try different things. And that's what it's about, trying different things in the language. I think this one is really important. Don't immediately tell students the answer. Give them an opportunity to find out what it means for themselves. Don't rush to say, yes, that's correct, or no, that's not right. Get them to think about it. A useful technique for this is giving them time to think, putting them in pairs to talk about it together, and then sharing their ideas with the whole class. So think, pair, share. So that works for all activities, whether it's a gap fill or a full-blown role play. Giving them time to think about the answers, sharing them with their partner, and then sharing them with the whole class. But providing that silent thinking time, that preparation time, where the individual is just thinking about what they're going to do and what they're going to say, is really important for all activities where you expect them to be talking to other people.
And I think it also answers the first picture that we saw, what happens when we ask them to talk without giving them prep time, and we see many confused faces. So this can really help us in those kind of situations.
I think probably we've all been there where we've asked a question to the whole class, and half the class is looking very blank, and one person answers because that one person is very comfortable and familiar and ready to speak, but everybody else doesn't speak because they haven't had time to think about their answer. So when you ask a question to the whole class, ask the whole class the question and say, don't answer me now, I'm going to give you 10 seconds or whatever. I say, okay, now put your hands up. Give them that time to think what they're going to say. So that's practice and rehearsal time as well. Okay. Danish?
Yes, another key thing we need to consider while we are planning and designing our activities, and we hope to be able to achieve some communication, meaningful communication between our students, is to think about how closely they relate to real life-like situations. So for example, if you ask students to do something that they are not required to do in real life, they don't see a purpose to that activity. Like, yeah, my teacher is just, teaching me, is not preparing me for the real world. So it's very important to think about how useful this particular activity, this particular task can be in real life. And does this relate to what they do on a day-to-day basis? So, for example, role plays relating to things they do on a day-to-day basis, like talking to their friends or visiting shops or going out shopping, etc., can be a good idea.
And I think I would also add here that often there's a lot of emphasis on English to pass the exam. And that's okay, and that's one extrinsic motivator for students. But make sure, a lot of students say, English is a global language, but do they understand what that means for them personally? Do they understand that English is going to be something that they will use in their lives, in their future careers and future life in different ways? If they can understand that, then they can start thinking about, well, when will I use English? Now and when I'm older? Why is it important, and what are those lifelike situations that I will be using English in?
Okay.
So creating a genuine need for communication.
So I think we can again look at the star of my life and two truths and a lie activity here. So unless you set a task which requires them to talk to each other, they'll not be motivated to. So in that particular activity, there are those little things that they need to find out what is true, what is not true, how it is related to the person. So there's a need for them to ask and answer questions. So always remember to create this need before you set up an activity. This need will make them communicate with each other.
I think that's great, yeah. And the thing with children and teenagers is they want to talk to their friends. So it's just harnessing that, and saying, well, what do you want to talk about? Find out what they want to talk about and get them talking. If one of them's seen a particular superhero film and they want to talk about it with their friends, then they'll want to do that, and other people will want to hear. They'll need that information because it's important to them. And the last one here, you say every student has a communicative role. Can you talk us through that one?
Yes, sure. So many a times what happens is when we set up certain activities, there's a stage where only one person is talking and the other ones are only required to hear. So if they don't really have a purpose, if they don't really have a communicative role, they'll start to lose interest. So an example from this webinar, when we played the video, you were only required to listen to it, but to give you a purpose, we asked you to make notes of the tips relating to one of those three areas. In a classroom, the next step we can do is ask students to present their ideas to the whole class. So this will be a communicative role. So each stage should have a communicative role for all the students, not that only some are communicatively involved and others are only passively involved. This will result on lack of communication and also lack of interest in activities.
And one of the best ways to make sure that everyone has a communicative role is by getting them to talk to a partner. It becomes one of those things, every activity, students should automatically turn to their partner to start speaking about what they've done and to compare their answers. That is fundamentally the best way to get everyone in the class communicating, getting them to check their answers with each other before you go to the whole class. That's really important. Okay, so we've talked about how we can, the importance of preparing, getting students to prepare for their communication and what we need to bear in mind. In terms of classroom activities, I think one of the best things that we can be doing for communication and collaboration, because collaboration brings about communication, is projects. Now, we've got a couple of ideas here. So maybe you've done these, maybe you've heard about other teachers doing these, or something you want to try. But a project is like one big activity, like putting together a class magazine. And it could be a paper one, or it could be more adventurous and more a digital one. But it's one big activity which can be broken down into lots of different chunks, which practice all 4 skills. So here you've got some ideas of things you might do: interview people around the school, find out what news is happening, create competitions. What you will notice about every one of these activities is that they require students to work together and to communicate. So that's one project idea. Have you ever tried any of these kinds of projects in your class, Danish?
Yes, I have. I have tried it. And something I really would like to highlight here is, of course, they are collaborative. And something which I find particularly useful is, because there are so many different types of tasks that whole team requires to perform here. So, they really get a lot of opportunities to portray the best of their skills in certain areas of their particular interest. So, for example, if I'm a person who does not like to talk a lot, maybe I can take up some research work where I'm reading more and producing facts to others. If I'm more of an artistic person, I would like to maybe draw and explain that to others and tell them why this drawing relates to this article maybe. So, really create a lot of opportunities for them to do what they would like to do.
I think that's really important. And one of the best things about projects is that if you get them to work together to allocate those tasks, as the teacher, this is where you can step back. Don't say, okay, so Lakshmi, you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and Danesh is going to do this. No, get the students to decide what they want the project to look like and who's going to do what. Another idea, create a music band. They can invent a band. They can name it, make a CD cover. They can record video interviews and design media campaigns. All of these things, you can get as creative as you like. And to be honest, you probably don't need to be that creative yourself, because the students have the creativity. As long as you have the idea, they will take it and they will run. Do you want to say anything more about projects, Danesh?
For the second project, Becky, do you think it's important to have musical instruments and recording equipments with us to be able to perform this project effectively?
No, I mean, if you've got students who are musically inclined or have instruments, that's great. But if you haven't, you could just they could create a song which they sing, or you don't even need the music aspect. It could be, you could say, okay, you're the managers of a new band. The band needs a name. The band needs cover art for its CDs. It needs posters. It needs an advertising campaign. You need to book a concert venue. So you can tailor it to your students. And if you give them roles like that, okay, you are the managers of this music band, then they are, it gives a real purpose to what they're going to do. Okay, so those are projects, but there are lots of other activities which you can use in the classroom to create communication. We've talked about exploiting the gap this is the third one here. So we talked about the information gap. There's where one person has information and the other one is trying to find out information. That's really important. Do you want to take us very quickly through these other two here?
Yes, sure. In the first one, creative letters, what you do is you give a sheet of paper to all the students. So everybody has a sheet of paper with them. You can Allow them to think of an idea they would like to write about, or you can give an idea to the whole class depending on the level, and then you ask them to start writing. After a little while, as they've started writing, you shout freeze and everybody stops writing, and you pass on the sheets of paper to the next group or to the next student, and then you ask them to start writing again. So essentially the sheet passes on to different people, and they all collate and they all contribute to this particular letter. And in the end, it's a good idea to have it back to the original writer and ask them to read about it. You can ask them to match it with the original idea they had and how different it has become. You can ask them to find out how interesting, how funny it is. You can ask them to see if it makes any sense or not. If it does not, you can give them the task to make it meaningful. So it gives you a lot of room to experiment and be creative with writing.
And what about the grammar auction?
Grammar auction, I think, is a very creative way of giving feedback. It's really, really enjoyable. Otherwise, feedback stage is where we sort of find students don't show a lot of interest. So what you can do is, during an activity, as you monitor, you pick examples of good use of language and some incorrect use of language. You can put them all on the board. You can allot money. You can put your students in groups or individual, depending on the size. And you can allot a specific amount of money to each group or student. Then you ask them to read the sentences one by one. They decide whether the sentence is right or not. And for everything they believe in, they have to bid a particular amount. So for example, there's a sentence, Danish live in Delhi. And I think it's correct. So I say, okay, I'll bid 500 rupees to it. If it is correct, I win 500. If it's not, my money is lost. The person who gets it, who says that it's not right, they will also have to correct it. So if they're able to correct it, only then the money doubles. So it's quite an interesting way to engage them with the feedback stage of a lesson.
I think what's interesting about these is that on the whole, we often think about communicating and we equate it with speaking. And the letters one here shows that we can communicate through writing, and it's a really creative way of doing that. And the grammar auction shows us we can make grammar a communicative activity as well. So you get them to talk in their groups about whether they think the sentence is correct or incorrect, and it creates that communication, that need for communication. Competitions are always good for collaboration and communication. Okay.
And sometimes, sorry, a little trick on grammar auction. Sometimes what I do is, I don't create those sentences for correction. I ask them to create them. I ask them to think of sentences. I ask them to think about their partners and write imaginary sentences as well. So you can think of different ways to involve and engage them.
That's really good. Yeah, again, coming back to including the learners and getting them to contribute in the class and their learning. Okay, so when we're running activities, what are the things that we must do to make sure that students are communicating and are communicating confidently and without fear as such? So one of the first things we would say is to monitor, but monitor unobtrusively. Don't be monitoring so in a way that stops communication. Students should know you're available, but that you're not going to stop them when they're in the middle of their flow, and they can just carry on with what they're going to say.
A little trick I would like to share here is, so sometimes what happens is we set a task and students start to work on it, and we start walking around in front of their faces, and as we approach near a group, they stop writing and they look at us. They're like, no, don't worry, keep writing. They're like, yeah. So a very useful idea is to walk behind their backs, so they don't really notice you, and keep a little distance. Keep your ears really active and keep a little distance. Don't come too close to them. So, it naturally starts to distract.
And one thing I might do sometimes, it depends on your class and what your learners are like, but one thing I might do is if they start turning to me, I will kind of like shield my eyes. I'm like, I'm not looking at you. And they get a bit of a joke, and then if they ask me something, and this is something, which I need to answer, and if it's about the language they're using, I'm like, no, I can't speak. And, so I turn away and I might move away and then creep back later when I'm trying to listen to what they're saying. So try and be out of the way of the communication. But at the same time, listen carefully, make notes on the good language you hear, and also on the language that you want to focus on for corrections. But it is very important to make notes on both the strengths and those areas to develop. Then you can use that in a grammar auction or other kind of feedback activity. So again, when we're talking about communication activities in the classroom, it's really important, if that's an activity which is aiming at improving their communication, fluency is prioritized here, not accuracy. The aim of the task is for students to communicate and not to be 100% accurate. So don't worry, don't interrupt them to correct mistakes or for any other purpose. Make sure they've got their time to talk, and then you can note the mistakes that they're making, and then you can come back to those later on. Okay, but the important thing is the fluency. And then you can build that confidence, and they know that they can make mistakes in that time, and it's not a problem as long as they're getting their message across. So yeah, monitor, go into the background, hang out by the wall, but listen carefully.
Sometimes what I do in my lessons is, once the activity has started to run smoothly, I quietly step out of the class and stand right outside the door. The moment I step out, it gives them a lot more freedom, and I really see a lot of more noise. The enthusiasm really goes up. So you can try that, depending on, of course, your situation. You can try that. Just step out for a little while. They feel a lot freer. And then you quietly come back and take your seat and let them go along with the task.
And I think that thing you mentioned about noise is really important. Noise is good. Obviously, you want the right kind of noise. You don't want aimless screaming and shouting. But if you've got a good hubbub going in your class, then your activity is being successful. I think that's one of the best things about being a teacher. Sometimes you can hear the students really enjoying the communication activities they're involved in. So the British Council has a lot of useful resources you can use. We've got a couple of websites called Teaching English, Learn English Teens. You'll find lots of ideas for lesson planning, lots of ideas for activities to use in the classroom, as well as advice on different aspects of teaching. So I would highly recommend you look at these websites, and they will really help you in your planning and your teaching.
Sorry, I would just like to add all the activities and projects that we looked at today. The ideas have been taken from the websites here. So you can find more similar ideas there.
Yeah, exactly. That's really important to say. So get lots of ideas there. Okay. So coming to the third part of our session today. So you've done the activity. So you gave the students time to prepare for the activity. You did the activity. Now you want to give them feedback. So obviously this is a crucial part of language learning, helping students be aware of the errors they made and how they can do better next time, noticing that gap. So have a look at these two examples of feedback. Are these pieces of constructive feedback, Danish?
They're definitely positive feedback. You're definitely encouraging them. But I think it doesn't really tell them what they could do better, what they did well. So when I say excellent, Sarah, well done, I did not really see what I did well.
I think that's what I would say as well. Like going back to what John Kay in the video was saying, when you're giving praise, try and be specific. Don't just give generic, oh, well done, because students will soon learn to ignore that because that doesn't mean anything, and everyone gets the same well done, well done. So compare those two with this. I'll give you a second for everyone to read it. So, Danish, what would you say is the difference between this piece of feedback and the first two?
First of all, it's more detailed. Secondly, I think it's very, very specific to the areas the students would have performed in their task. So first of all, it talks about how this particular student used sequencing to order the information, and then the whole planning that they put in. And it also shows a specific language usage. So you use them a lot to show the order of events. So you're giving them example from their own language, and then you're encouraging them to think further, ways to improve. Can you think of other ways of saying this? So you're saying this repeatedly. Can you think of something else? So you're not really giving them answers, as we were discussing earlier. You're making them think to find more answers on their own. I think it's a very useful feedback.
Yeah. So I think these two examples here, they're praising students. They're saying what the teacher liked about what they did, working well together, completing everything, but then also picking out aspects to improve. So it's really specific. Those students are going to feel noticed and valued and respected, and they will be more encouraged to continue. Now, you might think, oh, this is too detailed. I can't do this for every student in my class. I would say you don't have to do it for every student for every activity, but do try and do it regularly so that students will pay attention to the praise you're giving them and will be looking to improve on different aspects that you pick up on.
Yes, and I think it's also very important to remember what the focus of that particular lesson is, because students might be making errors and mistakes to topics which are not relevant to that particular lesson. So I think it's very important to stay focused on that as well. And I think it will also cut down the amount of feedback that you give.
Yeah, that is true. And you'll find that, and one of the useful things about it is you'll find that most students, and a lot of the students, will be making similar mistakes related to that target language. So you can praise specific things related to the individuals, and then you can say, so the whole class, on the whole, I really liked most of you were using the past tense a lot, but there were some errors. Let's look at some errors from everyone. And so you don't actually have to specify who said the errors. But when you're looking at individual good things, you can pick out individuals. So that's great. Okay.
And I think this is a very positive experience of receiving feedback. When your name is not called out there, you still get to see, oh yeah, I was wrong here, but you're not caught. I think it's very, very effective to kind of have them have this positive experience of receiving feedback.
Exactly. So this is feedback from the teacher. How else can students get feedback? So that was a question to everyone watching. So the teacher can give feedback. Who else in the classroom can give feedback? I skipped ahead a bit quickly, so maybe you saw. But obviously, learners often know the mistakes they make. They can give feedback to themselves, and so can their classmates. So why would we want to encourage self-reflection and peer feedback, Danish?
I think self-reflection is actually the skill which helps us become more autonomous as a learner, and which actually facilitates a learning. When I'm told there's a chance that I kind of see what I need to learn, there's also a possibility that I just say, okay, sir, yes, sir, I'll do this. When I am made to think about it, when I'm made to reflect on it, there's a higher possibility that I'll see what is it and how I'm going to be able to overcome or, improve this further. And talking about your feedback.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really important, and it builds their own confidence and motivation, and it makes them a more critical learner. And that's a useful skill for all their subjects, not just in language learning, getting them to think about their own performance and what was good about it. Don't forget that step, but also what they might want to improve.
And I think it's a very useful tool for the lifelong learning. Once they've developed this habit, once they've developed this practice, they can use it across subjects or whatever through their life.
Exactly, really important. And so on this screen, we've got 3 examples of how you might do that. The top one is perhaps more appropriate with older learners, getting them to think about what they can and can't do and how well they can do it. The bottom right one, where it says Dianu, these ones are things which, this is an example of how you can encourage peer feedback, okay? Again, get them to emphasize the things that went well, and then maybe they can also find one thing to correct or improve. So it's encouraging positive and constructive feedback. And it's often a really useful tool for them as learners to do that.
And a little thing to notice here is to sort of balance between their strengths and areas to develop. I think it's never a good idea to give a lot of areas to develop in one single feedback. And it's really important to have more of their strengths than areas to develop. You know, you don't want them to be demotivated looking at your feedback. You want to keep the motivation high. That's the only situation where they would be willing to improve further.
Okay, so we've come to the end of our session. The last slide is not showing for some way, but I just wanted to emphasize, just to sum up, some of the most important things that we've talked about. So it's essential to build up a good rapport with your students. Use your body language, smile, use praise and positivity. Be enthusiastic, because that will infect your students with enthusiasm. Create that positive learning atmosphere. Encourage students to work together, get them to collaborating, because when they have to work together, they have to communicate. And also you can ask that they communicate in English as much as they are able to. Support students, scaffold their learning, hold their hand from knowledge they know to knowledge they're acquiring, and take them on that journey. And then they can be much more successful. They can achieve these things, but you might need to break it up to get there. Let them, don't interrupt, let them do the things that they, let them do the task, and then you can be making notes to give that specific praise and feedback at the end. And finally, always encourage your students to reflect on how they are doing, and also think about how their classmates are doing. But give that in a structured way so that they are providing that, top-heavy positive feedback and one thing to think about and improve. Okay. So, Danesh, do you have any final things any final thoughts that you would like to say?
When I was looking at this one, let students do the task without interference, I think it's very important, especially at low-level learners, because it shows that you have confidence in them. And when you tell somebody, I know you will be able to do it, your half job is done.
I think that's really important. That's great. Okay, so that's what we wanted to say, and we hope that you've got a lot of ideas and advice here for how to get your students communicating with each other and with you. And so we're happy to take your questions. So thank you very much. And are there any questions that people would like to ask?
We will, 1 second, ma'am. We'll present them.
Thank you for the incredible presentation, ma'am. It could be a food for thought to our teachers. We have a question here. When children begin to learn a second language, they already know the first language. They know the letters and alphabets of the first language. They may speak and read the first language. Does this mean the teacher can start the second language with introduction of words and letters of alphabets in writing?
I think the best way to introduce a language is with the spoken language. Yes, obviously writing and the alphabet is very important, but they will come to that. The first thing is to get them speaking in the language rather than writing in the language. Danish, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think I agree with you. I think it's very important to start with little tasks and activities which give them opportunity to talk and start to communicate, start to speak the language before we start to look at the writing bit.
We have a second question. How to involve everyone in classroom to communicate with each other, because it is very hard at times in the class to make the students speak.
Mm-hmm. So I imagine classes are often quite big. Maybe you've got 30 students in a class, maybe more. You can't speak to every single one in the class, but what they can do is they can speak to their partner. So that think, pair, share idea is really, really crucial. Get them to do a task, get them to talk about the task with their partner, and then you can pick on one or two students to communicate the ideas to the whole class. Even if you've got a big class, that doesn't mean you can't do speaking. If you've got a big class, that's more opportunity for speaking because you've got more people they can speak to.
There is another question regarding the online classes. Do British Council offer any online classes for teachers on in capacity building?
When you say capacity building capacity in what areas? In
language teaching. In language teaching.
Yes. So the British Council does offer. I'll share my screen with you in a second. You can go to the British Council website and you can let me share my. Oops. In fact, this is probably quite useful for me to share.
First we will cancel sharing. First we will stop sharing, then you can share.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
1 second.
Not yet.
Yes, you can start sharing.
Okay, so if you go to the britishcouncil.in, British Council India, you'll find that we have online courses at the moment and they are half price. So that's definitely worthwhile investing in for your own professional development. So that will improve your own English language skills and your confidence in using the language in your own capacity and as a teacher. While I'm sharing my screen, I'd like to also share the resources that I was mentioning earlier. So the Teaching English website is a really great resource. It's got lots of ideas of how you can support your own development. It's got ideas for teaching different levels, and it has lots of different articles and lesson plans as well. The other 3 sites which might be useful, if you've got small kids at home, you've got Learn English Kids with lots of activities, games, songs, and videos. You've got Learn English Teens for older learners, older children, again, focusing on different skills with grammar, vocabulary exercises, videos, and games. And also for adult learners or older teenagers, you've got the main Learn English website, which gives us lots of ideas and lots of there are the apps, podcasts which you can use or your learners can use, and the different skills there. But if you want to focus on your own English, then you can use this Learn English site. There are British Council podcasts. You can get an app to do that, and also you can sign up for online courses.
We have a next question. Is scaffolding is a good strategy? The language chunks involve grammar, and grammar is scary for students. When to teach grammar?
When to teach grammar? Okay. I think, grammar is important, but so is vocabulary, so is pronunciation, so are all 4 skills: reading, listening, writing, and speaking. So grammar doesn't take priority, doesn't take precedence, and it needs to be incorporated with all the activities you're doing, as you do with everything else. You might have a focus on a particular piece of grammar for one lesson, but you've got to start thinking also of, okay, so we're going to be focusing on past tenses today, or we're going to be focusing on used to, something like this. How can you use that grammar for communication? Because it's not enough for students to know how to write a sentence using that piece of grammar. We do more than that with language. You've got to be able to use language to communicate. So when would we use that in a real life situation? Danish, do you want to add anything to that one?
I think it's also important to realize, of course, we are required to teach grammar, especially for exams as well. I think it's useful not to start with grammar as a concept, not to start with, okay, today we are going to learn past, present, perfect tense. I created this one, there's no such tense though. Start with something communicative and then use that context to bring focus to grammar and make students decode grammar from those language bits. So for example, in a start of my activity, if you were using, is it your birthday? Is it da 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 da? So you can use this kind of an activity to teach yes no questions. You change subject and the first, your auxiliary will also change. You can ask them to focus why this is different here, why it is different here. So I think start with communicative activities, start with communication, and then build grammar learning on those communicative aspects instead of starting with grammar and then thinking of building communication on that.
I think that's really important.
There is a question related to this subcoding. There is a teacher from Revati. She has asked a question. Once I tried scaffolding technique in my class for teaching letter writing and its type. Though most of the students learnt it, still some students couldn't. Is it any other method we can use as a follow-up activity to such students?
I think if you've tried scaffolding in that way and it hasn't been as successful as you would have liked, I think go back and think about what the steps were that you took, and maybe there were some steps which could have been broken down further. Maybe if I think students can achieve most tasks. Okay, so you want them to write a letter, to a formal letter to someone about something. What are the steps that you need to go through? Maybe that class needed more steps to get to that final product. Okay, so do you need to introduce the basic language, some sentence stems, some sentence phrases? Do you need to show a model of a letter in that context? Get them to think about the different parts of that letter, get them to notice different features. So when you come to scaffolding, it is essential and it will help students to get to the end point. But the key thing is to kind of break it down into those much smaller chunks so that they can get there. So think of it as a ladder, but make sure that the gap between the rungs are not too big. Okay, make sure they can step from one rung to the next easily and not have to make a flying leap 2 rungs up. Danish, do you want to add anything on that one?
Yes, I think it's very important to remember that the rungs are easily, they can easily cover from one to another. And it's also very important to remember that your ladder is long enough to take them all the way. Don't fall short on your steps. So have manageable steps for your students and also make sure that you're providing all the support they need. So you need to be really careful about the existing level and how familiar they are with the topic, how familiar they are with, for example, letter writing. So it might just have been that they're not familiar with the letter writing. So I think you need to be a little more thoughtful about the steps you are taking.
And you might feel like the first time you do that, you're giving them too much support. And you're like, well, what's the point? I'm basically doing it. But that's the first time. And then the next time you ask them to do a similar task, writing a letter, but to a different person or something, they might not need quite so many steps. They might need a lot of support still, but they might need fewer steps or less support. And then the 3rd and 4th and 5th time, they'll be much more familiar with it and they'll be much more able. So don't be afraid to repeat tasks and give them a slightly different context or something, but repeat the task and see they'll get more confident in doing that activity.
Becky and Danny, we have another question from James, as a primary school teacher. For every task is assigned to the students to a small group, when I provide my teacher version at the end, this helps them to compare and explore their morphological errors by themselves. Is it good?
So I didn't quite catch the whole question. Could I ask you to repeat it?
It is in the chat. You can refer the chat.
Okay.
Okay. For every task is assigned to a students or to a small group, we provide my t-shirt version at the end, and this helps them to compare and explore their morphological errors by themselves. Is it good?
Okay, I think that can be a very good and powerful technique. You've asked your students to do something, and then when they finished, you show them another example of how it can be done well. It needs to be done carefully because that can be very demotivating. They might say, oh, mine's terrible compared to that one. So as long as you present it in a positive way, saying, okay, so this is a good model. What things have you done which are the same as the model? What pieces of language have you used which are the same or similar? Have you used the same structure? Get them to find the things which are positive and which show that they've done a good job, and then get them to find one or two things that they could take from that good example to improve their own work. What I would suggest is, that model, don't let that be a surprise. I would suggest that teacher version, the model at the end, that shouldn't be the first time they see a good version of the task. Use that to introduce the activity, get them to check their understanding of it, get them to give their opinions on whatever the task is, and then they can do the task themselves, and then you can show them the teacher version again and say, okay, so did you do this and this, compare it with this one, what can you improve next time?
Regarding English language teaching, often the very big mistakes that the teacher makes is that the content precedes the objectives of language. How to overcome, ma'am? Because we live in a society in which mark determines the outcome rather than the real outcome of language learning.
So they want to. So you're talking about how can we make it more real to them, the language?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's a difficult balance. Obviously, primarily for students, they need English to pass their exams, to get a good mark, to get a good job. The problem is, once they've got that job, they may not be able to do the job very well if they don't have the English skills. They can pass the exam to get the job, but then they can't do the job because they haven't got the English skills to do it. It's a difficult thing to get that balance right. Yes, you need to help them to do well in their exams and get good marks, but you also need to give them the skills to communicate. And that doesn't just mean talking, that means working with other people, working in teams, collaborating effectively. So what I would say is remind them of what you're teaching them will help them pass the exams and also be useful in real life. And the most important thing you can do is give them confidence, not to be afraid, So creating that positive atmosphere, making them confident, then they will try and they will use language, they will use English. Danesh, you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I think I would like to add is, when we are using communicative activities where they are collaborating with each other, when we are making them think about what they're doing, we are essentially also helping them develop their thinking skills, high order thinking skills, which we can use and we can encourage them to apply for the wider learning. So I think it's a lot about how we develop their thinking and how we help them see this connection between their communication and between the language learning for exams. So I think that's really helpful, because once we are able to communicate in a language, expressing your ideas, you're able to do that. Being able to put them on a piece of paper to score marks is something that teacher can just give them a little bit of tips and tricks on how to score marks. So that's all we need to kind of bridge this gap.
Okay, thank you. And regarding in India, we usually find that the competency level of PICS, basic interpersonal skills, are lower when they are compared to CLAPS. How to bridge these both and how to make them harmonious in language among these children? We find their cognitive level of understanding is better, but they are not able to communicate with each other on interpersonal ideas.
So, so you're saying that they often have the knowledge, but they don't have
yes, communicative. Yeah.
Okay, so they've got the, okay. I think this probably comes down to how a lot of students are taught. They're taught the knowledge first. This is how you make the past tense. This is how you use this structure. And they're not taught how to use that in communication. So start with communication as the goal. So today I want them to be able to plan an event together. Okay, so what language will they need? Start that way, start backwards. I think, when you have a system where you're teaching a grammar point and then you're working up to communication, that's not real, that's not authentic. And you're not going to get real communication. So start from the communication goal and then break that down. What language do they need to get to that goal? And communication is more than language and knowledge. It's about, behaviors and attitude as well. So you've got to encourage that. So don't just praise language, praise, oh, I really liked how you asked so-and-so this question. I really liked how you listened to his answer and you asked a good follow-up question. That encourages, the interpersonal communication. Danesh, do you want to add anything on that one?
No, I think I've covered it.
Okay.
Ma'am, we have often as a language teacher, we face this problem. Sometimes the students answer the question in a correct grammatical structure, but often they go off guard when it comes to content. They study language through content and they reproduce it through a route memory. So how can we overcome this problem, and how to judge that student, whether we have to award marks for them because the structure of the grammar is correct, or we have to not award marks because the content is not replicated properly?
So I think that's a good question. I think you've got to think about what is the aim of that activity. Was the aim grammatical accuracy, or was the aim fluency, or some other criteria? In both cases, you should point out, yes, you've got that grammatically correct. That is, it's a good sentence, but it doesn't really make sense in the context. Okay, it doesn't really follow on, or it doesn't have much relevance to the rest of what's going on. So it's important to identify good grammar, but also natural language usage. And say, yes, you made that correctly, but unfortunately it doesn't sound right because of this. A more natural way to say this is this. So praise what they've done well, but also make sure they are aware it's not actually going to achieve their communication goal. And at the end of the day, grammar is just how we describe the way we speak. It's just, no one has fixed the rules of grammar and then said, okay, that's how we must speak. Grammar is descriptive. It describes how, on average, we generally use the language. And that's why you get lots of different interpretations of grammar sometimes. So yeah, I would say, praise what they've done well, but also point out where it's not quite actually meeting the goal.
And I think we also need to sort of be a bit more introspective. and go back to our teaching and see if it's a sort of a replication of what we taught sometime. Maybe we missed this little step of linking their learning to real life communication, and then it's coming back into their production of language. So I think this might also be a point to consider when we see these kind of situations students are faced with.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. There is someone who asked, I'm doing one of the courses offered by British Council. As I have joined the course 2 weeks later after it started, I am 2 weeks behind the other participants. Do I have to finish the course within the stipulated time, or to get time, I have to join the course again?
Okay,
I
so
think,
yeah, go
I
ahead,
think this
Dennis.
is referring to future learn course.
Yes.
Is it about?
I imagine that the person is talking about a future learn course. If that is the case, then you can do it in your own time. You have 6, I think you have 4 or 5 weeks, maximum 6 weeks to complete the course. You can go at your own speed. That would be no problem.
Regarding the English score app, which they have undergone the test, the app is asking for the address of the participants, whether it is safe for us to share personal information. There was
Asking for
question.
your address.
Yes, I think the participants, while undergoing English score test, the certificates that they will get needed to be posted there.
Yeah, so I did the test myself the other day. I'm sad to say I only got C1. I think it's because they don't have C2. So if you get C1, it might be a C2. But it didn't ask me for my address. I imagine it will only ask you for your address if you want to pay for a certificate. You don't have to buy a certificate. It's completely, this test is completely, I don't know why I'm showing you my phone. The test is completely free. But if you want to buy the certificate, then you will have to pay. And yes, if you want the certificate sent to you, then I imagine you have to give them your address. But I think that will be the only time it asks you for address if you want the certificate delivered to you. There are 3 options for certificates. I think 1 or 2 of them are sent to you electronically, and 1 is sent paper. But,
thank you. There is another question. As English is an unphonetic language, could you suggest any simple methods learning spelling in English? I think it's a tricky question.
It's a tricky question.
Yeah.
The thing I would say is, don't teach the written word first. Teach the spoken word first. Okay, don't introduce the writing. Say the word, get them to get the pronunciation right so they get that in their head. That's the most important thing, the correct pronunciation. Then show them the spelling. It's one of those things you have to do steadily and throughout. Yeah, I think if we go into all the tips of teaching spelling, it would take a while, and we want to focus on communication today. So in terms of communication, definitely the priority is teach the spoken word, teach the pronunciation first, and then reveal the spelling, like, surprise, you would have thought it was spelled like this. You can do that later. Should we take one last question?
I think the questions have dried up.
Okay.
Okay.
Hello, Becky. We are collecting some information regarding the feedback on British Council's webinars. So I am sharing some of the feedback form to our teachers. We will share the forms, and I will also, please bear with me for some moment. Yes. Yeah, we have modified the British Council form based on the app which you have provided, English Score app. These are the earlier questions which you have given, it has been posted. Please give your opinion below. The webinar met my expectations. Overall, the webinar was high quality. Some, they can answer, the teacher can answer, whoever fills the Google form can answer. Then how has this webinar helped you acquire new knowledge or skills? The second question. And third question is also, how likely is it that you would recommend the British Council to a friend or a colleague? Choose one number where 1 is very unlikely to recommend, 10 very likely to recommend. So the British Council may wish to contact you for further feedback or a later date. These are the queries we have put up. And fifth one is, we may want to use information to send you details of British Council activities, services and events, including social events which may be of interest to you. Then the next question, we have modified this part. Have you attended the English core test? Yes or no? If they have attended, they can mark as yes. If they have not attended, they can mark as no. If they wish to attend, we have given the link also. If they click the link, they will be directed to the English core app.
That's
Then
right.
next question, have you attended the beginner English core test? They have attended the beginner English core test. Yeah.
Can I just mention that there is only one test. When they download the app, it will ask them to estimate their own level of English. Okay, whether it's beginner, intermediate, or advanced. That, I think that's just to set the scale, set the first few questions, but the test will automatically adjust to the level and the ones that they get right and they get wrong. So they don't need. There are not 3 separate tests. They just that initial question is to estimate where they think they are, and then they can see where they are at the end.
Okay. We will further modify the Google form. Then
Yeah, can
what
I suggest? Yeah, can I just suggest they just maybe you have a free text box. You have a tick box for A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, and then you just have a free text for the 4. They get 4 separate scores. But maybe we can talk about this afterwards, and I will help you with the.
Okay. We will modify further as per your suggestions, and then we will send the feedback form. Thank you, Becky. Now I request our State Project Director of Samudra Shiksha to give the concluding remarks.
Hi, Rebecca ma'am. Hi, Danish. How are you all? I think based on the questions that were asked in this session, I think it was very obvious that people are interested and they're more inclined to you. I hope it was a wonderful session. I think let the communication be grown on, especially being I am myself as a very poor in English when compared to my earlier days where I had my complete up to my bachelor degree. I had done my education in my mother tongue. So that was a basic problem, and it took me very longer efforts and more efforts to improve on English, and I'm still improving. I hope and I wish I can improve a lot with your guidance also. We are trying our part, and same has to be communicated to our teachers also. Why? Because the standard of our schooling and standard of our education will depend on how you behave, how you speak, how you adjust our day-to-day life according to the needs and necessities. And I hope this your lecture on this communication may help our teachers to grow their professional life more ahead, and in the coming years we see more education in English, especially in the communication English will grow up in UT of Puducherry. Thank you all taking all the risk to interact with our teachers from that very distance apart, taking all the risk. Thank you, Danish, for your wonderful efforts from British Council India. Thank you, Rebecca ma'am, for your wonderful presentation. And I think thank you, Anu ma'am, also for all the efforts that you took up to make this into reality. Thank you, one and all. And I hope we will be trying to communicating with you from office level, and we wanted more such this kind of interactions with you all. Hope this make our system, one education system, more flourish and more prospective. Thank you all. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I request our George sir to conclude up.
Yes, one more request to our teachers. We are collecting a feedback on webinars. We have been conducting nearly more than 25 webinars for past 2-3 weeks. So we would like to request our teachers to fill the Google form. I am sharing the Google form. This is a Google form we are sending to schools. Official email ID we have provided to all the teachers you can fill that official email ID. If you don't have that official email ID, you can give your own email ID also, personal email ID or official email ID. Whether webinars conducted by Directorate of School Education are useful, you can fill as per your convenience. Whether it is useful, you can mark yes, or if it is not useful, you can mark no. Then suggestions, whatever suggestions you want to give for improvement of the webinars, you can give your suggestions. Then for future, we have asked the frequency of webinars required. Now we are conducting on daily basis. Now we are requesting our teachers whether you want on daily basis on weekdays, or you want on weekly thrice, or weekly twice, or weekly once. You can suggest, you can mark any one of your answer. Then online webinars required. You can choose one or more topics. We have given list of webinars like cyber security, communication skills, department programs, and it goes on and on. And you can select as many number of webinars you require. You can click the webinars. We are also having pizza, yoga, disciplinary cases. So many webinars we are planning for future. So you can give your own list of priority. Then as usual, your name and designation, and you can submit the Google form. We request our teachers and head of institution to give your feedback on our webinars. Thank you so much for all the participants and the team from British Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone then.